Hi everybody, welcome to English 229 Gothic Literature. My name is Lillian Ruiz and I am the instructor for the class. And normally we would be meeting in person, but as you know, very little is normal nowadays. So instead I have this class video to tell you a little bit about what I would have discussed during the first day of class. And basically what I would have done is reviewed the syllabus and the course outline. So that's what I want to do now. And then we can begin in earnest afterwards. And I want to draw your attention to the top of the Moodle site because you can see that there are several sections there. The first is entitled Syllabus and Other Documents, and that's where I'm posting our syllabus, our course outline, our criteria for essay evaluation, and any handouts that I would have distributed over the course of the semester. And then there's also a section there for assignment due dates where I've listed out all of the due dates for all of the upcoming assignments, though you can find that information in our course outline as well. And then I've got a section for past class sessions, and basically what I will do is I will post the previous week into the past class sessions, so you always have the current week available for you, the bottom of Moodle, but you can always access the past class sessions whenever you'd like. Then there's also a discussion forum, and this is where you would be interacting as if we were participating in class, where you answer your attendance questions, which I will talk about in a few moments. There is also an optional live chat for this class. If you click on that link, you see that it will get you into a chat room where I will be available on Mondays from 1 to 1:30. There also is an optional live Zoom. If you click on that link, you'll see that I'm available on Wednesdays from 1 to 1:30. These are optional. You don't need to attend. Think of it as just another opportunity for participation or a place to answer questions or concerns or anything of that nature. And then you can see below that, I've got our first week listed because technically we would meet on Mondays and Wednesdays. So I suspect you probably are accessing this video on Tuesday, but this is supposed to be for our Wednesday class, which means that we wouldn't be having class again until next week on Monday. And as I will be talking about, I will be posting videos every Monday and Wednesday, much like as if we were meeting on Monday and Wednesday in class. So today's first class is a review of that syllabus and also to give you an idea of what our semester is going to be like. So if you look to the syllabus and the syllabus and other documents section, you can see that there are several pieces of information there, including things such as my name. And most people call me Lillian. I'm pretty informal. My phone number, and you can leave a message because I will be checking my phone messages. My email address, which is just my surname, Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, @gcc.mass.edu. Because when I started at GCC in 1993, it's hard to believe it was so long ago, email hadn't been standardized yet. We were still in the early days of email. My office is North 328A, though I'm not there this semester. Instead, I'm in my living room, which is right here. So this is my office for now. But you can always access me through our optional chat room on Mondays from 1 to 1:30, our optional Zoom on Wednesdays from 1 to 1:30, or also by appointment. And you can do that either via Zoom, chat room, or telephone, whatever feels most convenient for you. And you can see that I've listed the texts here. Now, I suspect that if you are a fan of the Gothic or a fan of horror, then you might already own some of these texts. And it's perfectly fine to use other editions of these particular texts. So you don't necessarily have to buy the text through the GCC bookstore. But for those of you who may not have access to these texts, they are available in the GCC bookstore. You can also usually access most of these texts online. And what I will be doing is providing links as they become applicable to those texts as we are reading them if they're available online. So some of these texts you may or may not be familiar with. The Best of H.P. Lovecraft, and we're not going to be reading it in its entirety. I've selected just 3 Lovecraft short stories there that we would be reading. Danse Macabre by Stephen King, and again, we won't be reading it in its entirety, and we will be reading pieces of Stephen King's analysis of what Gothic or horror is. The Exorcist, which you might know the very famous film of, but it also is a text. In fact, it was a New York Times bestseller before it became a film. Frankenstein, Dr. Dracula, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a combination of those three texts in one volume with edited by Stephen King. So it's very convenient. But again, you can use separate texts for all of these. These are probably the most iconic texts of the Gothic tradition. Frankenstein, Dracula, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We'll be reading all three of these. The Goldbug and Other Tales is a Dover edition by Edgar Allan Poe. Dover editions tend to be very inexpensive, which is why I ordered that. We're reading only about 3 of Poe's short stories, and again, you can find them online if you wanted to, so we're not reading that text in its entirety. Great ghost stories, and that's something I wanted us to at least have reference for during Halloween. And I have a special Halloween class that I don't like to talk too much about until we get to Halloween. Again, it's not necessarily a text you have to have, but I suspect it's a text you might want to have because Halloween is a great time to have access to great ghost stories, and it is a Dover edition, which means it's fairly inexpensive. The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Night Shift by Stephen King, which is a collection of his short stories, and we're only going to read a couple of them. That's how we're going to be ending our semester. And there is a long essay also by H.P. Lovecraft entitled Supernatural Horror in Literature that's published as a separate text in the Dover. So those are the texts that I ordered, and again, I'll be providing links as those texts become applicable. And I have a note here that it's assumed that students will have a good dictionary and thesaurus for reference. And obviously, as an English class, there's writing in addition to reading. And a dictionary is very useful, not just for definitions or for pronunciation or for spelling, but for things like etymology and parts of speech. And a thesaurus is also very useful for having words with similar meanings, synonyms, and your access to them. And that means that you can strengthen your writing by using different language. So I suspect you probably already have access to these through your computer, but having access to them and actually using them can be two very different things. So I wanted to get into the habit of incorporating that into your reading and your writing. Under the course description, this is from the course catalog, that this is a critical and analytic study of the Gothic tradition in both classic and modern supernatural literature with some attention to film. Students examine the significance of the supernatural horror tale and its larger literary, social, and cultural context. Now, there is a prerequisite for this class, what we call Composition 2, and that would be either English 112, 114, or 116. So, at least here at GCC, it might be under another code at another school. So you've already had a class where you've talked about how to read and write about literature. So this class is a focus on a particular kind of literature, Gothic. And this is the way we'll begin the semester, is trying to define what Gothic literature is and what supernatural literature is. And you can see that English 229, as I put in the syllabus, is a general introduction to the content and techniques of Gothic literature through examination of representative short stories, novels, and films, because obviously we can't see or watch everything. And this course emphasizes critical thinking, critical reading, critical writing, a lot of critical there, which is basically about asking questions. And a question that a toddler asks very frequently, why, is probably going to be the central question of college and of this semester. I've oftentimes said high school is about learning what, and college is about learning to ask why. And sometimes why is pretty complicated, by the way. So student learning outcomes, that as a result of successfully completing this course, students will be able to, 1, appreciate the study of the supernatural horror tale as enjoyable, significant, and relevant. As I sent you an email, I also teach a class in horror film. Unfortunately, the class didn't run this semester because there wasn't enough enrollment, but I will be offering it again in the spring semester, where we talk about the importance of film in the Gothic tradition. And while we touch on that in this class, it's not a class that's devoted to film, it's a class that's devoted to text. Number 2, to become familiar with the major works in the Gothic tradition. Number 3, to examine the major themes and characteristics of the genre, and you'll see that there are certain predictive elements that are associated with the Gothic, but at least good pieces of Gothic literature also have enough creativity in them that they are more than just formulaic. Number 4, to evaluate the horror tale in other media, such as film, and that's probably where people got their first introduction to those iconic tales, like Frankenstein and Dracula, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And 5, to improve oral and written communication skills, which is something that I have on all of my syllabi. We all have oral and written communication skills. So the idea is just to try to improve the skills that we already have. So class procedures, how would I do this in an online format? Number 1, I'll post a video of myself discussing the class material by the time our class would normally meet in person. The class would normally meet on Monday and Wednesday at 8 a.m. So by then a video would be posted. It might be posted before then, but certainly by Monday and Wednesday at 8 a.m. And then you have a 24-hour deadline to watch the video for that particular class and answer the corresponding attendance question, which would be in our class discussion forum, which is in one of the previous links or one of the early links in our Moodle site. One of the top links of our Moodle site. And if it turns out that you need an extension, you can't do it within 24 hours, please ask me. I'll be happy to give you an extension. Your answer on the discussion forum question is basically your attendance for that particular class. So there are no right or wrong answers for these kinds of questions. I just want you to interact. And the idea is that at least you post a response. Now, any additional interaction you have with your classmates in the discussion forum is considered class participation, similar to participating in a live class. And I'm well aware that some students learn best by participating and others learn best by listening, and I think both are valid. So you can decide how much or little to respond to the posts of your peers. You're not required to respond to the posts of your peers. I do ask, however, that you read all of your peer posts and all of my responses to those posts, because I will be responding, because that'll give you an idea of what would have been discussed during class and class discussion if we were meeting in person. And as I indicated, I'm holding optional chats on Mondays from 1 to 1:30, optional Zooms on Wednesdays from 1 to 1:30. Another opportunity for participation or asking questions. And then your written assignments over the course of the semester, things like journals and papers and your final exam, which I'll briefly discuss soon. I ask that you send that to my email, which again is Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu via PDF, because that works best with my grading program. So then I can use my grading program to give you individualized comments on that and send it back to you, to your email with my feedback. So course requirements, just some general things that you're expected to complete all the reading and writing assignments by the due date. There will be 2 out-of-class formal papers, one due approximately mid-semester, which gives us a good amount of time to talk about the material and how to write a paper, and the other due towards the ending of the paper, or the ending of the semester. You'll also be submitting periodic journal entries, informally discussing your reaction to the readings, and there's more on that in the journal section in the syllabus that I'll discuss. There's also a final examination. It's an essay exam. It's open book, open notes. So that exam would duplicate what we would have done in class, again, as a final exam. And there also is an institutional services disability statement that Greenfield Community Colleges values inclusion and equal access to its programs and activities. It's committed to fostering an environment of respect and full participation. The goal is to create learning environments that are equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. So if there are aspects of the instruction or design of the course that result in barriers to your inclusion or accurate assessment or achievement, please notify me as soon as possible. And if you're a student with a disability and might need reasonable academic accommodations, or think you might have a disability and you need an accommodation, please contact the Office of Disability Services as soon as possible. And you can see on the syllabus their contact information is there. So in terms of the journal that I was talking about, there's a whole section devoted to this that I wanted to read to you and then talk a little bit about. That reading and writing about literature is an ongoing process, and the journals are meant as an opportunity for students to discuss their specific reactions to the readings. Guidelines will be very informal, as each student should use this assignment as an opportunity to explore the readings in the way he or she feels would be most beneficial. And that said, I will give you some suggestions in class, but they're merely that, just suggestions. On the whole, the journal should reflect whatever relevant thoughts or questions, sometimes the questions are more important than the answers, the individual student has about the readings. The journals will also provide an excellent opportunity to brainstorm paper topics. And while I will be distributing paper topics, you can also come up with your own paper topics as well. And final exam questions. And the final exam is going to be an essay exam. As I had indicated, open book, open notes. You're going to have several choices within there. Obviously, you can't write your own final exam questions, but you might be able to anticipate something that would be on the final. And journals, because they are informal, will be graded informally. I'm not going to be reading them for grammar or mechanics, just for content. It's as if we were having a conversation on paper. And they will be graded on a check mark system. So a plus is excellent, a good is check plus, satisfactory is check, less than satisfactory is minus, and unsatisfactory is minus. And I'm going to be asking you to do journals for all of the major texts that we're reading over the course of the semester. So by the ending of the semester, you should have some writings about all of the major pieces we've done. Usually I suggest about a page or so for the journal, but as long or as short as you think it needs to be. And late journals will lower your grade by 1 full grade, and no late journal will be accepted after 1 week has elapsed, unless you've made other arrangements with me beforehand. And do ask me for an extension. I'm happy to grant it to you. I would much rather that you take additional time and do something well. So if you need more time on a journal or paper, just ask me. Now, attendance, I know we aren't necessarily meeting in person. Nevertheless, attendance, class activity, and class discussion is extremely important and cannot be made up. So absences and tardiness can be negatively reflected in your participation grade. There is a participation grade, which I will talk about. Anything more than 2 absences could lower your grade. And excessive absences could even result in failure. So basically, these are the attendance questions that I'm going to be asking you to answer 24 hours after I post them, after our videos. And again, if it turns out you need additional time, please ask me for an additional time and I'll grant you an extension. You don't need to notify me that you're going to be absent for a specific class, but do notify me if you're going to be missing several classes. And then consultations, you can consult with me either during those optional chats or Zooms or by appointment. And you can see that there's a section here on papers. Most of it is about formatting, that papers are due on the days specified. All papers should be typed, double-spaced, and have 1-inch borders. Drafts do not require a separate cover page, but final copies do. And cover pages should list the paper title, your name, the course and section number, my name, and the due date. And I hope you've talked about this in your Composition 2 class, but we will review it as well in class. Late papers, such as late journals, will lower your grade by 1 full grade, and no late paper will be accepted after 1 week has elapsed, unless you've made other arrangements with me beforehand. And be sure to keep a copy of any paper you submit for yourself. And as I said, I'll distribute paper topics, but you're also encouraged to create your own and get it approved by me. Now, in terms of those papers, the first being about midway through the semester, the second one being at the ending of the semester, you have the option of revising the first paper, the one that's going to be about midway through the semester. And basically what I'm just going to ask you to do is to submit the original graded paper with my comments along with the revision. And you basically get the higher of the 2 grades. And this is the way basically professional writers work. They get lots of editorial feedback and they incorporate that. So you can think of the first paper as a kind of draft, if you'd like. I know the first paper oftentimes leads to a little bit of anxiety and uncertainty. Now, the second paper is due at the ending of the semester, so there wouldn't necessarily be time to do a revision. On rare occasions, however, I have had students submit in that second paper early enough and convince me that it would be useful for them to do a revision. So it is a possibility, but I wanted everybody to know that everyone has the option for the first paper. Definitely. The idea behind the second paper is you are just incorporating what you've learned in the first paper, just with a different text. Now I have a section on plagiarism here. I'm going to skip that until our next class and go to the grading section, which is probably what you were most concerned with. And 10% is participation. So that's basically answering those discussion forum questions. 15% are those journals, approximately a page so or so of response to each of the major texts we'll be reading this semester. And I'll talk about the due dates in a few minutes. Essay number 1 or paper number 1, which will be due midway through the semester, approximately 4 to 5 pages or so, but as long or as short as it needs to be, 25%. Essay number 2, Also very similar, approximately 4 to 5 pages long, about one of the texts, another text that we've been reading over the course of the semester. You don't want to write 2 papers on the same text. That's 25%. And then that final exam, the essay exam, open book, open note, and that's 25%. And you can see that the grading structure of A, excellent, B, good, C, satisfactory, D, poor, F, failing. So, but I don't like to talk about the D's and the F's at this point in the semester, so let's just focus on the A, the B, and the C. And then I'm moving forward to the course outline, which is the second document in our syllabi and other documents folder. You can see I've got a couple disclaimers. Dates and assignments might be subject to change. And also reading assignments should be read before the dates indicated below, because basically these dates indicate what I'm going to be talking about during that particular date. And also, pursuant to the character of this genre, Gothic literature, some of the assigned material may be considered graphic in nature. So I just wanted to forewarn you ahead of time. You can see week 1 is devoted just to today, the introduction. We normally met on Monday and Wednesday. This would be Wednesday's class, in fact. And then you can see week 2 is introduction, where I'm asking you to read sections from Stephen King's Danse Macabre, the first 3 chapters, which he entitled Invitation to Dance, Tales of the Hook, and Tales of the Tarot. Basically, this is an introduction to what Gothic literature is. And if you can't have it read, don't panic, because my class video will talk about the major pieces. And then you can see on Wednesday, we're going to read that Lovecraft essay that I told you about, Supernatural Horror and Literature. It's a long essay, and I can tell you that it's rather dense, and it's part of Lovecraft's writing style. There's going to be lots of references to lots of texts you've never read. Don't let that intimidate you. And again, ideally, you would have that read by the 15th of September, but if you can't, my class video is going to talk about the major pieces of that particular text. And then in my mind, we're really beginning to read the literature itself in week 3. And you can see we're beginning with Frankenstein, a very classic text, and I've got multiple classes devoted to Frankenstein. The idea is that Frankenstein is a novel, so it's going to take us multiple classes to talk about it, and also view the iconic 1930s Frankenstein film. And the film is no substitute for the text, and if you have any familiarity with the film and the text, you know they are 2 very different stories. You can think of them as almost 2 separate entities. And we'll talk about why it is that Hollywood did that, as Hollywood oftentimes does. But ideally, and I know that the world isn't often ideally on the 20th of September, which is when I'm beginning to talk about Frankenstein, you would have read Frankenstein in its entirety as an entire novel, so that you would have started now, so that by the time we get to September 20th, you are done reading Frankenstein and you are at home reading the next text that we won't get to until October. Again, that's ideal. I don't know if it's necessarily possible, but you could see your first journal is not going to be due until we finish up with Frankenstein on September 29th. And that journal will be on Frankenstein. Though certainly you can reference anything from the previous materials that we would have discussed. And again, I'm thinking about a page or so of response to the novel Frankenstein. And you might even be thinking about perhaps writing a paper about Frankenstein. You could try out some ideas there. And then we move, and I put the class in chronological order, by the way, so that you could see progression. On the 4th of October to Edgar Allan Poe, and I've got 2 classes devoted to Edgar Allan Poe. I had ordered the book The Gold Bug and Other Tales, because it's a Dover book, so it's inexpensive. But the tales, or the stories we're reading from Poe, will be The Fall of the House of Usher, The Mask of the Red Death, The Telltale Heart, and The Black Cat. And again, I'll be providing links for all of these texts when they're available online. And also, you might have your own copies as well. And you can see that our second journal for Poe won't be due till the 6th of October. And by then, we would have read Poe. So you can decide how it is you want to go about those journals. I usually suggest that you write a journal after you're done with the reading when the ideas are still fresh. Some students like to basically write down ideas as they're reading. Some students like to wait until my class videos and they read the comments from their classmates in the discussion forum. So whatever works best for you. You can see then we go to our next major text, and this is called a novella, which means it is longer than Poe's short stories, or short stories in general, but it's not quite as long as a novel, such as Frankenstein. And that is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, another iconic text by Stevenson. And you can see several classes devoted to that. Ideally, you would have Jekyll and Hyde read in its entirety by the 13th of October, though we've got the 13th, the 18th, the 20th, and the 25th of October devoted to Jekyll and Hyde. And that puts us to finally week 8 on the 27th of October will be our Halloween class. As I said, I try to do something a little special for Halloween. So basically all you need to do is to tune in, so to speak. Week 9 is when we transition over into Dracula. Dracula is the longest read of the semester. It's probably the fastest read of the semester as well. Again, we've got multiple classes devoted to Dracula. And paper number 1 would be due right around the 3rd of November, though I encourage early papers. So my suspicion is that your first paper would probably either be devoted to Frankenstein, Edgar Allan Poe, or to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And then when we go to paper number 2, you could address works that come afterwards, such as Dracula. So we've got multiple classes devoted to Dracula. Hopefully you can have Dracula read in its entirety by the 1st of November. But we've got up until the 10th of November to discuss Dracula, and that's when our 4th journal would be due on Dracula. Then we moved to H.P. Lovecraft, and we read his, or by that point we would have read his essay, Supernatural Horror and Literature, the beginning of the semester. So now we get to read some of his short stories, and he's best known for his short stories. And the 3 short stories we're reading, though I ordered them in a text called The Best of H.P. Lovecraft, but you can find these short stories in multiple areas. The Outsider, Pickman's Model, and the Dunwich Horror. And then this is around the 17th of November, which is when your Lovecraft journal would be due. Again, about a page or so for each of these texts, but as long or as short as you think it needs to be. We move to The Haunting of Hill House, a very famous ghost story by Shirley Jackson. Again, multiple classes devoted to that, so we can talk about it and also film. And then we move to The Exorcist, and that begins on December 1st. You would have handed in journal number 6 for The Haunting on the 29th. Again, multiple classes devoted to The Exorcist. December 1st, December 6th, December 8th, December 13th. And then finally, we end the class with Stephen King, which is how we began the class by talking about his Danse Macabre, where he was analyzing what horror is. Here we get to read some of his short stories. I just selected 2 because we're at the ending of the semester, and as well as his foreword in Night Shift, where he talks a little bit about his feelings about horror. The 2 short stories that appeared in the collection Night Shift, but again, you can probably find them in other areas, Jerusalem's Lot and One for the Road. And that basically would do it for us for the semester. Your Exorcist journal would be due on December 13th. There is no journal due for King short stories, but as we get towards the ending of the semester, we'll talk about that. If you want to earn a little bit of extra credit, you could always submit in a journal for King short stories. Our final exam is scheduled for Monday, December 20th. That would be at 8 a.m. if we were meeting in person. So I will have it posted by Monday, December 20th at 8 a.m. And you would have 24 hours in which to respond and submit in that final. If we were taking that final in person, you would have approximately 2 hours to take that final exam. So you should devote about 2 hours to the final. Certainly not 24 hours, but I wanted to give you 24 hours in which to submit that exam. You can see that Monday, December 20th is also when your second paper is due. So that's the very ending of the semester, though early papers encouraged. So basically all that's left at this point in the syllabus and other documents folder, there is a handout about criteria for essay evaluation, which I will talk about as the semester progresses and we start talking about writing papers. And the last piece is your attendance question for the class, which is basically your introducing yourself to the class, and I'm just asking you to tell the class a little bit about yourself in our discussion forum, and that'll count as your attendance for today. Feel free to upload things like video or pictures, but not required, and that hopefully will give us a sense of the introductions we would have done if we were meeting live in class. And then on Monday is when we begin talking about the actual semester itself and trying to define some terms such as Gothic and horror and supernatural literature. So I hope you are all doing well. I am doing well. and we will continue on next week. Take care. Bye-bye.